welcome to First Take. My name is Jifa Bampo. Today we're speaking to lawyer and extractives expert, Dr. Yao Graham. But of course, we're not speaking about mining. Dr. Yao Graham belongs to the group of 18 CSO leaders, rights activists, and advocates who have some concerns about the controversial Proper Human Sexual Rights and Ghanaian Family Values Bill 2021. A lot of the provisions in the bill are being subjected to scrutiny. However, there are also those who want to see a quick passage of the bill. In this conversation, we take a look at the provisions and why this is not fit for purpose for our democratic environment. Thank you very much for watching First Take. Thank you very much, Dr. Graham. Good day, and thank you for joining us on First Take.
Thank you for the chance to speak about this very important issue.
So, you're a lawyer, you've been working in extractives for a very long time. I mean, this is not typically the kind of subject one would expect you to be speaking about. Actually,
I think that is in a way in which histories can be cut up into bits and pieces depending on the moment, because my whole adult life, actually, I worked as an activist for democracy, for social justice, and so on. And the extractives is just an aspect of that. I mean, the organization I ran, Third World Network Africa, was set up to work for social and economic equity within Africa and for Africa in the global order. And it continues work that we started as student activists. I mean, I trained as a lawyer, got a PhD in law, specializing in international trade and investment. But apart from teaching for a very short period, I've applied my legal knowledge to campaigning work for the things which I think are important for society.
And it's been a lot of work you've done over the last 40 years. I can't believe it. Since what, 1982?
Well, I got my degree in 1977.
Okay, I don't want to say whether I was born or not.
And I got my master's degree in 1979. I was actually finishing my master's when June 4th occurred. I came back into all the tumult, and then I left soon after Liman came to power to go and start my PhD, in 1979, 80.
And you returned in 1982?
I came back in the middle of my PhD. I came back. I was doing my field work here in 81 when Jerry Rawlings came back to power, and I decided to stay to contribute to the project of lifting a country which had completely collapsed. So I worked with the PNDC government in its first 3 years. When things began to go the direction some of us were not happy with, we left, including a number of my good friends, Akoto Ampawa, Kwame Kakari and others. And we ended up in jail for our troubles, spent varying periods of time, in prison in the late 80s. And then I went back to the UK to finish my PhD. And I came back, and I worked on Third World Network since returning, and of course also was involved in as the founding editor of Public Agenda newspaper, which is now defunct.
You mentioned Professor Kwame Kakari.
Yes.
You are with him as a member of a group of 18, top scholars and leaders opposed to this Proper Human Rights and Ghanaian Family Values Bill. Tell us, how did you all come together to taking a stance against this bill?
I mean, we share histories. Some of the people involved in that group I've known for more than 30 years. And some I've known more recently. And from different entry points, we've worked on issues of democracy. Democracy broadly defined, not simply in terms of free expression, but democracy even in terms of socioeconomic rights, people's living conditions, accountability, and so on. So that was the unity. And this bill, precisely because it unites, in its threat, a challenge to the things that we've all fought for from different entry points, we decided to come together to speak, lend our voice, and also take the risk of the opprobrium, because we are used to taking opprobrium. If we're not, we would have stopped doing this work long ago, and challenge Ghanaian society to think deeply about the implications of, this law being passed.
Are you surprised that suddenly Ghana finds itself in the eye of a storm with this bill?
Yes and no. No, because in spite of the provision in the criminal code about unnatural carnal knowledge, I mean, Ghana has been fairly open, you know, in terms of its treatment of gay people. I mean, when we were students, we knew there were bars in Accra where gay people went. We heterosexual also went there. There are great places to go and have fun. You know, everybody goes with their lives without anybody being in anybody's hair and so on. But in more recent times, of course, a certain culture of intolerance, you know, promoted by various forms, I think, of a religious fundamentalism, has been part of driving this. And if you go back to the reports of the UN Human Rights High Commission for Human Rights, there are indications that Ghana has been cited, you know, as a place where there were problems, and the government has been called upon to fix those things. President Mills, famously, was conservative Christian, was very public in his hostility to gay rights, to gay people. Let me put it that way. And that was a moment of some discussion. I even took part in a radio discussion where I challenged the propriety and the constitutionality of the president's position, you know, at that time. But more immediately, I mean, it is clear that there's a global movement, a global far-right, you know, fundamentalist movement, which is promoting, you know, this climate of hate across the globe. You know,
I've heard of this group of far-right religious evangelicals who have held a conference, and they are the ones who've been pushing this. But one of the sponsors of the bill, the Honorable Sam George, the MP for Ningo Pram Pram, indicates that he didn't even know about that conference, and that the reason why he mobilized support for this bill was because of the opening of an office for the LGBTQ community somewhere in Kwabenya, and that incensed him and others to come together to do this. What do you make of that?
I mean, he may not know the genesis and the similarity of the bill with other bills passed in other countries.
That's Nigeria and Uganda.
You know, Hungary and, you know, places and so on. That doesn't change the connection. I mean, he may have his own personal reason to see a kind of, as it were, campaigning opportunity. But there is a global project, you know, that people are pushing on the basis of their belief systems, irrespective of what your national constitution provides or not.
When you look at Ghana's constitution, the chapter 5 talks about human rights. However, it doesn't necessarily refer to sexual rights. So tell us at what point where the bill is at variance with what we have in our constitution as human rights.
Well, it's at variance in many, many ways. It's important to stress that actually the threat of this bill is to every single Ghanaian.
Why? How so?
The constitution is based on the equality of citizens and their equal enjoyment of rights. If you take the human rights chapter of the constitution, it provides for people to enjoy these rights. And let me read it to you. The fundamental human rights and freedoms enshrined in this chapter shall be respected and upheld by the executive, legislature and judiciary and all other organs of government and its agencies, and where applicable to them by all natural and legal persons in Ghana, and shall be enforceable by the courts as provided for in this constitution. 12.2. Every person in Ghana, whatever his race, place of origin, political opinion, color, religion, creed, or gender, shall be entitled to the fundamental human rights and freedoms of the individual contained in this chapter, but subject to respect for the rights and freedoms of others and for the public interest. So it is sweeping in that way. So in that sense, therefore, it is not about majorities and minorities. If I am a minority person and there are social attitudes or discriminatory attitudes which lead to the violation of my rights, it doesn't mean that because the majority share that, therefore it is okay to violate my rights. The Constitution makes provisions for when rights can be curtailed. But what is interesting is that it is not an omnibus provision. You find that under each of the articles or sections, the formulation for the extent of restriction is specified. It's not the same omnibus derogation.
Yes, of course. It's not for everything. So, for instance, I know that the sponsors of the bill refer to the Cybersecurity Act,
it's a wrong analogy. I mean, the thing is full of many of those wrong analogies. It talks about the law against vigilantism. Okay. Now, vigilantes threaten life. They threaten people's property. They threaten people's dignity. They can beat you up. So they are doing things that invade and threaten the rights of other people. And they engage in criminal activity. So the law bans that. The cybersecurity thing has things to do with public safety, you know, and so on.
Management of information and access to data.
So there's a justification which can determine the limits to which your rights can be violated. Okay? So it's important to make this point. It's not rights enjoyment, it's not about majority and minority. I've used myself in other contexts as an example. I'm epileptic. We live in a society where epilepsy is considered to be the work of the devil or witchcraft, or, you know, it's a sickness, you shouldn't go near people, and so on and so forth. So I've suffered discrimination. So you get stigmatized, and stigmatization is a form of discrimination. But let me come back to the point I was making about the fundamental threat that this law. You see, because of the focus on the LGBTQI issues, the sweeping kind of totalitarianism, the sweeping authoritarianism of this law, as represented in its clauses 2 to 5, are not noticed. Clause 2 contains a definition of proper.
What constitutes proper human sexual?
Yes, Ghanaian family values includes, and it lists those things. Then it goes on to make provisions about the responsibility and bindingness of these definitions on everybody and institution in this country, under penalty of criminal sanctions. So you and I are enjoined to ensure the enforcement of these so-called family values. Now, these family values are specified here. Don't even specify gay issues. It's about things like the respect for the sanctity of marriage as a lifelong relationship between man and woman. Now, divorce is allowed under Ghanaian law. So what does this thing say?
That if you decide to divorce, then you are breaking, violation of that.
So is this inconsistent with the existing laws of this country? And
but
yet,
can't it also be stretched to say that you respect the sanctity of marriage, meaning I'm
talking about for the formulation.
For the formulation.
Lifelong. Till death do us part. Lifelong. Now, this is a particular value system. If people choose that, that's fine. Okay? Then the nuclear and extended family as the basic units for all Ghanaian ethnic communities. Now, there are many forms of family. I was brought up by my mother, single-headed, female-headed household. Okay, people are brought up by their grandmothers. There are migrant families who live there. So, but they have this notion. The word family is used in two contexts in the Constitution. One in relation to land and chieftaincy, and one in relation to the family, undefined, as a unit for bringing up children. That lack of definition recognizes, in my view, the variety of family. Then it has this one, the recognition of chiefs and chieftaincy institution as established by customary law and constitution as the ultimate source of traditional political authority and leadership, and as the custodians of the customs, traditions, and customary law, rules, and precepts that underpin Ghanaian ethnic groups and communities. Now, it's making assertions and claims which are false, both legally and in fact.
But isn't it the fact that chieftaincy and tradition are custodians of our culture?
One of the custodians.
Okay.
Farmers are important custodians of knowledge about farming. even the palm wine tapper is a custodian of customs and traditions. Our mothers, you know, so there are many custodians of custom. Okay, now, so, and the Constitution doesn't say anything about them as the ultimate source of, because chief tradition also varies from society to society. But the important thing though is that you see, one of the consequences of this section, if you look at it, all their things refer to ethnicity, ethnic community, you know. So they, so for example, new family in all ethnic communities in Ghana, chieftaincy that underpin Ghanaian ethnic groups and communities, you know. It talks about the Ghanaian ethnic groups, their definition of gender and so on. Now, why is this reference to ethnic groups important? Because that reference to ethnic groups goes away from the primacy of the Constitution to taking customary law and custom, which in the hierarchy of norms of this country is at the lowest level. The unifying normative and legal system is at the level of the Constitution. And the Constitution has provisions about the family. It doesn't have a particular specification. Constitution doesn't provide for marriage as a lifelong, you know, so and so. The Constitution uses the word gender as used in the way it has come to us, that gender identities, they are varied, mutable, and so on.
So is it wrong for us to think that the use of the word gender in the Constitution refers to a male and a female, or a man and a woman?
Because if you look at even the words used in our Constitution have changed. So 79 use the word sex. 92 moves to gender, because gender recognizes more variety and so on and so forth. Although, of course, scientific knowledge has helped to understand that sex is not binary. It's beyond dispute in spite of what this law tries to claim. And then it has something about duty to uphold cherished societal ideals of selflessness, communalism, good neighborliness, hard work, you know, custom. I mean, these are terms not known to Ghanaian constitutional law. So on the basis of ethnic notions, it tries to then provide a far-reaching framework which is binding, is the duty of every citizen to promote and protect that set of values that they have defined in this law. It is parents, guardians, teachers, everybody. It's almost like a new set of directive principles of state policy. Now, to that extent, it is almost like trying to amend the Constitution by stealth. Because to impose a value system on us and then provide penal provisions to enforce it. Because all of us are under a duty to promote these values, and then we are prohibited from undermining these values. So you can't even question what they have decided are the proper values of the society. So a person shall not undermine, directly or indirectly instigate, command, counsel, procure, solicit, any other manner, facilitate, encourage, promote, whether by personal act or presence or otherwise, an act that undermines the proper human sexual rights and Ghanaian family values. Any person who contravenes these paragraphs commits an offense and is liable on summary conviction to a fine of not less than 1,000 penalty points, and or a term of not less than 2 months and no more than 4 months. This is everybody. It covers, it threatens, it's creating a normative regime for everybody, upheld by a penal regime. So also the effect, of course, is that you can't criticize it. You can't say some other value system is valid. It's a challenge to the freedom of conscience, freedom of expression, freedom of thought. I mean, all the freedoms. Because it says, henceforth, this definition
is what is the Ghanaian family value system.
And it is sweeping to the extent, because it also elevates customary law norms to the level of constitutional norms. Now, we amend the Constitution through a particular process. So there's that. So even before we come to the LGBTQ, I think, there's this threat to the rights regime and also the status of the Constitution, okay, as the framework which defines, values in this. Because the Constitution, I mean, people always talking about, the Constitution in
narrow terms.
But the Constitution also, in its aspirational character, is envisioning a certain kind of society. So the other point is that this claim that because something is not specified in the Constitution, therefore it is not covered, is a fallacy. Because we also have accepted that international human rights norms have to be imported into our Constitution. So the Constitution doesn't provide for the right to food. But there are judgments which recognize the right to food. Because the right to food is part of human
human right and dignity.
Precisely. Okay, so these things kind of evolve. But back to this point, this section 2 definition of proper human sexual rights and Ghanaian family values, okay, and the punitive provisions in sections 4 and sections 3, 4, and 5 are a threat to all of us, our rights, far-reaching, because it's a value system which is not founded in the Constitution. That value system, because for example, it's not founded in the Constitution, and yet it is now going to guide the operation of all citizens under a duty of of conviction if you don't promote or defend it.
There are controversial bits of the bill where family members are asked to report loved ones, where if you violate that subsection, that section 6 subsection 1, you'll be handed jail terms of up to 5 years.
Absolutely.
And then there are prison terms also for sponsors who will have even more time in jail, 5 to 10 years, and also the disbandment of the formulation of any club, association, society. And you indicate that these are violations of rights as we know them, in terms of freedom of speech, freedom of association, and the like. But the proponents of the bill also raise issues about the extent of our law in allowing certain activities that may not be acceptable to all.
But you know,
so that therein comes in the demand for specificity.
Well, I mean, if you share their values and if you share their interpretation of the latitude that the Constitution allows for the restriction of rights and freedoms, then of course there's a mischief to be cured through this. We can come to a question whether in fact
there is a mischief or not,
because that's part of our argument, but also how they are seeking to cure the mischief. But let me make a final point in relation to the scope of the implications of this thing. Because I mean, there are many people who are sleepwalking to giving away their freedom because they don't like gay people. Many haven't read the bill. Say, this thing to stop all these homosexuals. They can go to jail if they don't accept some judge's definition of proper family values, which is I mean, there's nothing in the Constitution that backs it. So you have to report, okay? But there's one effect also of this provision is that it's creating a new category of officers and functionaries in the criminal justice system. Why do I say that? It says, if you can't find a police, I mean, an offense in
a community member.
Yes, a community. It says you can report to a political leader. Who is that? Who is a political leader?
An assembly member, maybe.
Political leader is not defined in this act. It's not defined.
But aren't assembly members, for instance?
They are a category of political. Yes. They are. But the other is a priest, a political leader.
No.
Why not?
He's a religious leader.
Okay, if you insist. Okay. So who's an opinion leader? That's also one of the authority figures identified. Who's an opinion leader? You can report to an opinion leader or customary authorities of the community. Now, under the criminal justice system, citizens report to the police. This is creating an intermediary category of people who are vested with authority. Why? The effect actually could be to create a vigilante network and give people powers which are not founded in any law. But all these things will represent amendments to existing laws by implication. So I'm saying that is beyond liberties. It's about the constitution that Ghanaians, through a collective process, through a referendum, formulated for themselves, is now being amended by this bill with its far-reaching new directive principles of Ghanaian family values, so to speak. Okay? And a bindingness on penalty of prosecution and imprisonment. So this category of people who are being created now, the criminal justice system doesn't know these categories. Chiefs, under our laws, have no criminal justice powers. So this again is doing violence to the institutional architecture of criminal justice in this country.
You mentioned that chiefs don't have any criminal justice powers, but isn't it the case that there are many communities that still rely on customary law, still go to the palace for judgment? I remember the provision that was struck down that said that chiefs had no powers to summon anyone.
Chiefs are important people in societies. People respect them. They carry out arbitration functions and so on. The Supreme Court case that you're talking about, it flows from the provisions of the Constitution. Judicial power is vested in the judiciary of the Republic. That is very clear. The Criminal Code and the Criminal Procedure Code have clear provisions. So again, it is true that because of the weak reach of the state, people have to make do. But which is why when we think about Ghanaian democracy, the Chief Justice spoke recently about the paucity, of courts around the country. We need to bring these functions, build institutions that are present in the lives of ordinary people so that they benefit equally, from the promise of democracy. So I agree with you, but the fact is this kind of provision creates an open-ended thing for people to exercise any power they like. Recently, assembly members who voted in a particular way were made to kneel before, the Joabihini. That's illegal. Actually, it's cruel and degrading treatment for which they can sue him. It doesn't matter what traditional office he holds. It's an abuse of his traditional position.
Authority.
And also interfering in the right of citizens to choose as they like. Those things are going on. Chiefs are taking people's lands and so on. Chiefs are threatening to ban people and expel them. One chief said, you have people executed if they are gay and so on. That man should have been arrested. So it is important to situate these things in the context of the culture of power, what this thing represents, because the Constitution is seeking to build a predictable, uniform system for all citizens. This bill, taking ethnic values rather than the Constitution as the starting point, is offering a certain approach. Ethnic values are diverse. The Constitution is seeking to create a diverse society which is also uniform in terms of its fundamental values. This is a threat to it.
I asked earlier about gender. The proponents of the bill say there is nothing that refers to sexual rights. But in terms of what the bill proposes, they list who this is applicable to.
Yes.
And they list a tall list
Yes.
of individuals.
Including people like myself.
Gays, pansexuals. I mean, I must admit, some I had never heard before. But when they reference the fact that there is nothing like sexual rights, how then do we tackle that? Because for many, that is the starting point of giving more and more recognition to a minority group that they don't approve of.
The rights that are specified by the Constitution are not exhaustive. There are also international human rights norms which are applicable in our context. It's the total effect of different constitutional provisions and human rights principles also, which I think we need to take into account. Okay. Now, the right to make choices and to express yourself, okay, are important in how, for example, people's sexuality expresses itself. So if I'm a gay person, okay, respect for my dignity, inherent dignity as a human being who should enjoy all the same rights, leads to you having to leave me alone. So the issue about rights is not a linear discussion all the time. Okay, so if you say a right to dignity, if the Constitution gives everybody, irrespective of who they are, certain rights, the question then becomes, on what basis do we limit them? Okay, to say it is not listed doesn't lead to the conclusion, therefore, that it is not allowed. That right is not given. You have to specify why it is not. And the Constitution makes provisions for the situations in which rights can be limited. The question is, somebody's gay identity, how does it interfere with somebody's rights and so on? The provision about the circumscription of rights talks about public health, public safety, okay? To what extent does somebody being gay affect public health, public safety? Now, they make all kinds of spurious claims in the thing. They confuse pedophilia, bestiality, with gayness.
They point to a section of the bill, section 20, where LGBTQ people are protected, that it's prohibited to engage in any extrajudicial mistreatment of them, and that anyone who does so, you'll end up in prison for 3 years. Those who may have a condition that requires public health intervention will get it. They will insist that this is a positive step that negates the argument of mistreatment, incitement of hatred, and discrimination.
You see, I mean, there are things starts from the presumption that if you are gay, you are sick, you are abnormal, which itself is discriminatory in its stigmatization. Okay, that's the first point. Secondly, the provision that, you know, if you recant and so on, like when you take to the juju place, you know, this is the language of the fetish, you know, take to the juju place, then you recant, you know, then they say, now that recanted, we will treat you and put you back. The having to accepting so-called treatment, which is an unscientific route anyway, in those conditions is through coercion, which violates your dignity, which ends up subjecting you to a form of torture, because it is not your choice. Because you didn't choose. Because like, if you won't accept to go to, if you accept to do this, you won't go to prison. So even in that moment, rights are being violated. Okay, and there's you know there's literature on this. You know, forced treatment is a form of cruelty, cruel and degrading treatment, and can be torture. So, for example, the thing about intersex people having correction of their abnormality, it's a form of torture. Because if you impose it on me, because the right to health, which is one of the fundamental rights, is predicated on the thing that you make choices about what happens to your body. So in that sense, it violates people's right to health, the so-called compassionate, you know, treatment. It is not compassionate. It's torture. It violates people's right to health. It's a form of coercive treatment, okay, and so on and so forth. So
you don't agree that, or you think this is just a section thrown in there to appease those who may think that they're seeking to incite hatred?
Well, they don't know, because since this thing started, people have been beaten up all over the place. And interestingly, this being so compassionate that people will sentence, I mean, we've had laws in this country against vigilantism, against mob justice. How many people? There's a culture of lynching in this country. since this thing started over the past few months, where has been the upscaling of policing protection? There's an upscaling of attacks on people who are suspected, not proven, suspected of being gay.
Well, there was a video making the rounds where two gay people, I saw the video, were engaged in a sexual act in a car.
Yes.
And it was filmed and they were then beaten up. In that instance, would you say it's not proven?
Well, I mean, but if somebody is caught in a sexual act, can you mete out instant justice? Is that allowed under the law? That is the point. We are talking about people taking the law into their own hands. Even if you take your kind of unnatural carnal knowledge as given. You see. So there's a vigilante culture which has been promoted. And the more these things go on about categories of correction, and false claims where the gay people somehow flaunt their lifestyles to attract young people. I thought that was really a heterosexual problem. When we're students in Legon, the people who flaunted their wealth to attract the small girls were the heterosexual men. The 100,000 plus young teenagers who are getting pregnant in this country with anybody paying any attention to them are heterosexual. How do they get into that position? They are not, they are unlikely to be consenting people. Even if they are consenting, the power relations within which that consent take place is problematic.
But is it not true that because of poverty, maybe because some people have ambitions, they will do anything, which also involves getting involved in a homosexual relationship?
Well, it is possible. It is possible. But
that is what people are seeking to hear.
But I'm saying that actually, this is transactional sex.
Whether it's a homosexual sex,
it is not a homosexual problem.
Or whether it's homosexual sex or heterosexual sex,
it is not a homosexual problem. Go to what's his name? The professors who were outed for sexual harassment. Those were instances of people trying to use their power to sleep. Go to the workplaces, the bosses who are sleeping with their subordinates, who are hoping to be promoted, who get jettisoned, like a rag when the next, beautiful thing comes. Transactional sex, it's all over the place. In countries with very strong tourism cultures, this is one of the biggest problems, where young people earn a living sleeping with tourists. Gay, heterosexual, it is transactional. So to conflate transactional sex and homosexuality itself shows that they don't understand the social phenomenon that they are talking about. And it is conflated, that conflation also reduces gay people to a unique type of people in deviant behavior, when actually transactional sex is a sexuality-wide problem. And really it's a question of power relations in society. Who has the means to pay for sex, okay, and who is ready to be paid for sex. It's not a gay or lesbian or whatever problem.
One of the criticisms I know the group of 18 have against the Proper Human Rights and Ghanaian Family Values Bill is the criminalization of LGBTQ people. In putting these issues to proponents of the bill as to why they seek to criminalize a particular set of individuals, they insist that our laws are, for want of a better way of putting it, scattered all over the place. So they want to consolidate all the issues into one, hence this bill. Will it be more difficult to enforce the laws against homosexuality if we kept unnatural carnal knowledge or expanded it?
Well, first of all, they misrepresent the issue, because unnatural carnal knowledge is an act. An act. Homosexual relations are relationships. Okay. Heterosexual couples are not having sex all the time. People have relationships for a variety of reasons. Companionship, to plan things together and so on. So unnatural carnal knowledge proscribes an act which can, as you correctly point out, can be by heterosexual people or gay people. The late Professor Sai, in some related context, said, what is natural sex? Is oral sex natural sex? Is putting a finger in somebody's vagina natural sex? What is natural sex among consenting adults? Because we are forgetting also that we are talking here about consenting adults. If a heterosexual couple decide that they use sex toys to improve their sexual life, is anybody's business. So this, and it flows from this bogus prescription of proper Ghanaian sexual and family values, which is not binding on all of us, and therefore those things flow from it, which is why I underline that. Because when you come to all the claims that they make here, and their struggle to marry their insistence on binary sexual identity with a recognition of intersex and so on, it is because the science is bogus, the legality is contestable, and it's unconstitutional. You see, so you look at this list that they put here of people who things which are prescribed. I mean, me speaking here, I'll go to jail. Why is it that they should have the freedom to express their opinion and nobody else should? Why?
Let's talk a bit about another aspect, which is activism.
Yes.
So advocates, allies, that they are also termed as allies in the bill, are also targeted. They indicate that no one should sponsor, support, whatever, grow any institution such as that. Now, one of the concerns they have is external support from outside Ghana. And so this is an attempt to curb that. Ghana is signatories to international human rights conventions.
African human rights conventions.
Yes, and we've ratified some of them as well. Where is the contradiction for us if we continue to push forward this bill?
Let's put aside the international aid business. We have defined a set of values for ourselves as a Ghanaian. We are arguing that measured against those values, this bill falls down.
That is our constitution,
and also the fact that we accepted international human and also the international human rights norms that we have accepted. This bill falls down. Let's go back to the definition of gender. Gender, they now as any sexual gender identity that is contrary to the binary categories of male and female. Now, I mean, how do you criminalize something that you yourself in part of your law recognize to be something that comes from nature?
But how do you also not know that the Constituent Assembly, when they agreed on gender, did not also just think of it as male and female?
But it is not for some judge and co using their private members' bill to amend the Constitution, because there is a meaning, generally accepted meaning of the word gender in these variable senses that we all use. And in fact, in judicial interpretation, the everyday meaning is a first stopping point, unless specific meanings have become attributed through a process of specialization and judicial interpretation. So we have to take the everyday meaning. And if we take that, this is their thing, that even an identity is criminalized. It's astounding. It's astounding. Identities are criminalized. So this thing is not, I mean, it's the categories of things that, it's not practices that are being criminalized. Okay, the unnatural carnal knowledge is about an act Very. This one is into relationships, into identities, and so on. In other places, ethnicities are criminalized. Religious identities are criminalized. This kind of thing is on the same spectrum with those kinds of things, you see. So I think it's a hodgepodge of value systems, bogus scientific claims with no roots, which justify torture and maltreatment of people, all on the basis of a flawed notion of proper Ghanaian sexual rights and family values.
On that point, one of the targets of the bill are children, and there's a whole section, section 18, seeking to address the protection of children. Yes. I've heard many raise concern, not just about people purportedly being gay or other, but about scope creep into television, for instance. Yes. Cartoons these days introducing gay characters, or some movies introducing minority groups like in the LGBT community. In some instances for them, it may be contrived, forced, such that eventually it's normalized. What I understand by the proponents from the proponents of this bill is that those are things they don't even want to surface in Ghana. So they're trying to look into the future to stop these instances and thus protect children. And so they don't want LGBTQ people to be able to adopt children, for instance, because if they cannot be heterosexuals and have their own children, why should a heterosexual person have children and they adopt? I've also heard about those kinds of concerns. I know those may seem cultural, but from a constitutional point of view, would we be violating the rights of an LGBTQ person who may want to adopt a child? Should we allow them to adopt children, for instance?
Why not?
It's because of the notion of family that people have.
There are people who, women and men, who live alone, who look after children. There are people who are engaged in all kinds of things as a way of living. There are drug barons with children they are bringing up. You see, we are selective in what we consider to be good or bad. There are parents with serial sexual partners passing in front of their children every day. They are still bringing up their children. You see, the test that I know is used for adoption, there are many tests. The quality of your domestic life, your means, and so on and so forth. But here, you and I, if you were campaigners for gay rights, and I'd like to believe that you are open-minded on this matter, so-called allies, even me, I can adopt a child under this provision. That is the insanity of some of the provisions in this bill. You see, because this is an assumption, you see, that being gay is an acquired taste, so to speak, which is a dubious claim. Okay, because the whole array of people that they've listed here, even in their own logic, you can't say that an intersex person is an acquired identity. Okay, so it's a mishmash of things. So, and back to the thing about protecting children. I mean, there are rules about information broadcasting, what gets shown after what hour, the role of the censorship board to determine content and so on. I mean, there are institutions who are charged with that function. Okay, has Sam George and co done an audit of the work of those organizations? And they are telling us that that work is inadequate. If there are amendments to be made there, what is the appropriate site of those things? Even parents at home have a responsibility for managing the content their children watch. And actually, from a certain point in life, teachers and peer groups in school become even more important than parents in terms of some of the values that people pick up. As somebody who went to boarding school, I know the values that I grew up, with my friends, the social set in which we are. And you see people are marked, by. So again, this simplifies the thing about how, people are brought up. Should an alcoholic be allowed to adopt a child? So there's a whole range of criteria to which you look at what is a fit parent, not this ad hominem thing which assumes that because of a certain identity, a certain sexuality, therefore you are unfit to be a parent.
Now, you're a lawyer, and a lot of the things you've talked about have been from the legal point of view and linking it to our Constitution. But many who've been having these discussions have been very, should I say, emotional about it, very vested in it. Do you foresee that as work starts to look at this bill in Parliament, that we will have the opportunity of a fair, balanced, and emotional discussion?
Of course, we are not having a balanced. We are not having an ornament. It's the most emotional discussion I've heard people engage in, and people who normally are very sober, are freaking out, showing the strength of feeling they have against gay people. And we also have a very strong feeling about the threat this bill poses, not only to gay people, but to all of it, because it's a fundamental threat to the promise in the letter and also in the spirit of the Constitution. So, and I'm worried also about how the Speaker, for example, is undermining both the dignity and the constitutional function of the Speaker.
What has he done wrong that maybe everyone...
People have told him he's a referee. It's not the first Speaker to do it. I felt a bit like that about Okwe, Professor Okwe. We all have prejudices.
So your criticism of
But when I've listened to, for example, the chair of the committee, the Constitutional, Legal and Parliamentary Affairs Committee, I've been very impressed with how sober he is. I've been impressed with the President's intervention, asking for a civilized debate, something we called for. I've been impressed with the majority leader's attempt to be very careful in how he spoke about the issue. That manifests a sense of responsibility.
Does that give you confidence?
It gives me confidence, but there are also issues which we haven't discussed here, and we keep coming back to it. At the beginning, this bill should not even have entered the list because of the charges that Article 108.
It shouldn't have entered the list of bills that will be looked at in this session?
They should throw it out quite early because of the charges it imposes on the...
How do you expect a bill that seems to have overwhelming support from members of Parliament to be thrown out? Well, you have backers as well.
If we take this attitude,
that there is overwhelming support,
then why do we have laws? Why do we have laws?
No, what I mean
one of the things that we complain about is impunity and unaccountable use of power.
No, what I mean is, at the end of the day, certainly a lot of work needs to go into the bill. Yes. And I think there's been some acknowledgement of that. Yeah. When I did speak to the Honorable Majority Leader some 2 weeks ago, one of the things he did tell me was it was actually going to take quite a while. So the impression some had that maybe in some 2 weeks everything will be done and dusted is not exactly the case. But to the extent that there seems to be a groundswell of support for it, it may seem unlikely that even the executive can take it off the hands of the private members.
We wait and see how it unfolds. We are making an argument which assumes that when an MP swears an oath to uphold the Constitution, it's a serious oath they've taken. It's an opportunistic act. So that if you are confronted with chapter and verse which says that if you look at this bill, it's going to impose a charge on the public treasury, and it's a disqualification from day one, you owe it to the overwhelming majority there to say, sorry, overwhelmingly, you want us to commit an illegality. I sympathize with your dislike of gay people, but under the laws of this country, this is not the road to go. You see, so overwhelming, because when people are lynching somebody, they say, Julo, and people come around. It's an overwhelming majority against that person who is being killed for stealing a phone or suspected of stealing a phone, which if he was tried, definitely will not get a death penalty. But that person is killed by an overwhelming majority who have decided that the law is nothing. So in talking about this issue, we need to move beyond the focus on how angry people are. Because if that's the way it is, then those who are saying that my children cannot marry someone from another ethnic group, who don't want to see certain ethnicities in their workplaces, okay, they are justified to discriminate under the Constitution, irrespective of its provision. So we are trying to build a society in which all of us find a place in the diversity of viewpoints. I mean,
so you disagree with the Speaker's attempt to determine that this vote be taken in public? Members
as somebody pointed out, he was elected through a secret ballot. If there had been an open ballot, I dare say he would not have been elected.
I'm told that it's only under 2 conditions that secret ballots are allowed in Parliament. I think it is the voting for elected office and for one other thing, and this voting for this bill will not come under that. So you can't use that argument.
But let me ask, what is the Speaker's interest in his role? To sound like those who are out there, that will see those who stand where? Is that part of his job description? To be a partisan? That's what I'm talking about. If the Speaker becomes a partisan, then what is our Parliament? What is our Parliament? If MPs will disregard the law, the Constitution that they've sworn to advance, to protect, and to respect, and do whatever they like because the majority out there, then anytime we suspect somebody of doing something, we take the law into our own hands. And there's too much of that, which is why it is important for our leaders to show the way. Because part of the reason why people are losing confidence in electoral democracy is that they vote in hope and expectation, and they keep getting disappointed in a variety of ways. And it undermines the belief that the Constitution advances people's lives. And so the thing about building a constitutional democratic republic is a multifaceted kind of process. At big moments, like when big calls have to be made, if those calls are not made correctly, you go down a slope which you don't know where it's likely to take you. And to frame a law of intolerance, discrimination, and promotion of vigilante culture in the name of some concocted Ghanaian sexual rights and family values, which will then turn into guiding principles for Ghanaian society and public institutions under the pain of criminal punishment. And then from there, everything else flows. You can't get anything more egregiously dangerous to the Constitution than that.
Dr. Yao Graham, and that's where we have to end it. Many thanks very much for speaking to us on First Take.
Thank you.